Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor, Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm on my way actually to do a little bit of last minute Christmas shopping. I'm actually recording this a little bit early, ready for next week. But I thought it was kind of appropriate because I actually want to talk to you about a different sort of shopping, and that is shopping for spares for your classic car. So in the recent weeks, if you are a Morris Minor owner, you might have seen that one of the companies that a lot of us have relied on for the past few years for spares seems to have mysteriously started to have some issues. Their premises have seemed to have gone up for sale, and people haven't been getting their orders. So it looks like potentially yet another one of the places that we've been kind of able to get spares from for years and years and years now seems to have unfortunately gone under, isn't going to be trading anymore, and isn't going to be an option for a lot of us to get the parts that we need for our Morris Minors. And Morris Minors do really well with young people for a variety of reasons, but one of those reasons is most certainly the availability of spares. You can rely on the ability to get parts and be able to kind of drive them, use them almost as much or as regularly as a modern car, because you can kind of get the spares that you need, get the access to the things that you need with relative ease, and it's not too different in that regard to a modern car, and it offers you the ability to own a classic car with kind of some less stress. And there's a few other classic cars that have the same kind of appeal. That spares availability plays a big part. If you can only afford one car and you want it to be a classic, then you do need that availability of spares. And I'll admit that that spares availability is something that played a bit of a part in my choice to go for a Morris Minor, as I've spoken about before on the channel. So seeing another one of these parts suppliers potentially struggling and not going to be an option for us in the future made me kind of think about how the landscape has changed for spares and parts availability over kind of the last 30 odd years, I guess, because I guess from the 1990s, I mean that's when Peggy was restored. She came kind of back onto the road in about 1996, following being purchased by her second owner and being restored and things like that. And so that is, I guess, a period where Morris Minors started to have a bit of increase in value and interest. They would have been anything from 40 to 30 years old at that point, and they've only kind of been increasing in values since then for the most part. So how's that parts availability and that spares cost, which is a big thing, changed? And so I'm really fortunate that actually a few months ago my dad was sorting out a few bits of his paperwork and things and found an old spares catalogue from when he briefly owned a Morris Minor in about 1999, and the spares catalogue was for a place called Mr. Grumpy's, which some people might know, but doesn't seem to be about anymore. You can still buy some of the spares kits that they used to do through other suppliers, but it isn't something that's kind of in its own right anymore. Peggy also came along with a couple of spares catalogues, and one that was pretty complete in her folder of things that she came along with was one from ESM from 2003. So what I did was I picked out a couple of parts from there, parts that I've had to buy in the last few years, or kind of some of the parts that might have to be purchased in the next few years of my ownership of Peggy, and kind of compared how the prices have changed from 1999 through to 2003, and then kind of on ESM's website right now. And obviously we've got to think about the fact that in that 20-year period between 2003 and now, there's going to be inflation, increasing costs associated with some material production, and obviously some changes in the last few years means that some things are having to be imported for a much greater cost than they used to be. But some of these price increases are even beyond kind of the explanation of that. So it's kind of quite an interesting thing that I thought, and I thought you guys might like to hear a little bit of that as well, and hopefully it'll open up a bit of a discussion in the comments on my social media about the kind of potential impacts of this. As you'll know, if you regularly listen to the podcast, earlier in the year I had to try and track down some new leaf springs for Peggy, and I ended up going for an old set from a car that had been dismantled, because new springs are kind of known for not being particularly strong. There seemed to be an issue with a batch of them not that long ago, and it's put a few people off purchasing them. Now, just because they're a little bit perhaps dubious in their quality compared to the original ones, or at least that's the word that's been discussed, that doesn't necessarily mean they're cheap. One spring is £47.50 now from ESM, which is approximately double what both Grumpy's and ESM were charging in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So we've seen kind of a doubling increase, and some of those springs that were being sold in those catalogues seem to be new old stock, not remanufactured, which is something that is what people are having the issues with now. So that's kind of one of the things that I thought, well, if Peggy had had those replaced back when she was restored in the early 1990s, then perhaps that would have saved me a little bit of money. But it's not a huge jump, I suppose, not compared to some of the other stuff that I've got on this list, and it's I guess something that you can expect with kind of the changes in costs and things like that. Now, recently I went and got Peggy priced up for how much a full respray was, and a lot of discussion on that was around how much it would cost me for a set of wings. So I've actually managed to track down some rear wings, but I thought, interestingly, let's make some comparison points about the cost of front wings. So Mr. Grumpy's in 1999 was charging £65 for a steel wing, and ESM in 2003 were charging £75, which I think is probably a price you'd be pretty lucky to get hold of a fiberglass one for these days, especially as a new steel heritage wing is something like £550 on ESM's website today. And just to clarify, those ones from Mr. Grumpy's and ESM back earlier in the century were heritage steel wings as well. They had fiberglass ones mentioned, but again, very, very cheap. So I can't imagine why you wouldn't go for the steel ones if you could make them fit back then. Now, something I've recently been having a chat with Lewis about is a steel rear bumper balance. They seem to be very difficult to get hold of, and he actually managed to find one second hand on Facebook Marketplace not that long ago, but it did require him taking quite the drive to go and pick it up. So whilst it was cheap on Facebook Marketplace, probably cost him about the same in petrol, but buying them kind of new slash remanufactured doesn't seem to be an option on ESM or any of the other kind of spares sites that I could see. The only options that I can find are fiberglass ones, and that's what Peggy's got on the back as well, because these steel ones seem to be very difficult to get hold of. And I was flicking through these old catalogues, and when I saw the prices of one that you could get hold of back in the 1990s, I told Lewis, and we both thought it would have been good to go back, hoard a few and bring them forwards, because they can demand a fair price on the second-hand market these days. But back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, both Mr. Grumpy's and ESM, you could get a rear steel bumper valance for a Morris Minor for less than £100, around the £80 to £90 mark. So if you're getting your car completely resprayed, bare metalled and everything, you might want to treat your car to a new set of carpets. Peggy's got her original carpets and original interior in at the moment, and whilst I'd love to keep it that way, it's really going to depend on how tatty and things it looks compared to the bodywork once it's all done. And so that got me thinking. I thought, okay, let's price up how much a set of carpets would be. Now, if I'm going to replace the carpets, then I might think about switching them out for a lovely red set, which is the set that I've compared up, but it might all the prices for the carpets seem to be the same regardless of colours. Thought we'll have a look at the kind of Newton commercial, which if you're a Morris Minor owner, you know is kind of among the best options you've got for interiors for your car. So ESM back in 2003, you could get a full carpet set for your Morris Minor Saloon for around £59. Quite a bargain. That's less than a tank of fuel costs for a modern car these days. So a really good deal when you think about it. Comparatively, a set of carpets from new to commercial via ESM these days is going to cost you around £210. So about £150 increase, and quite a considerable investment, all things considered. Again, we're thinking about the fact that yes, some things have gone up in price just by increase in inflation and manufacturing costs going up and things, but it still feels quite a jump from £60 to £200. Now, I remember talking to someone more recently about the cost of a new petrol tank for the back of a Morris Minor. These can sometimes get a little corroded because they're a little exposed underneath the car. So I thought that might be another good comparison point. Interestingly, ESM in 2003 had a price on asking there, but you could pick up an extra large one for the price of around £79, which is quite a good deal, as the earlier Mr. Grumpy's catalogue had a regular sized saloon petrol tank in for £65. So it might be worth paying that a little extra in 2003 for the larger petrol tank if you do lots of long journeys in your Morris Minor like I do. Nowadays though, if you're wanting a regular size petrol tank for your Morris Minor, a replacement one that's all powder coated, etc. from ESM, that's going to cost you around £240. Now, when you're talking about upgrades to your Morris Minor, one of the things that sometimes comes up, and our last point of comparison, is the discussion of whether you think you need disc brakes on the front. Peggy's got a servo, and I've never really had any issues with her stopping, so it's not something I've thought about, but I have for a long time heard the discussions about the Mr. Grumpy's disc brake conversion kits, and these were in the catalogue back in 1999. For £250 plus VAT, you could get the kit, which is based on the Marina disc brakes for your front of your car, or for £400 could have them fitted and everything at their workshops, so £400 plus VAT. Now, whilst Mr. Grumpy's seems to have gone, you can actually still get Mr. Grumpy's disc brake kits from ESM. And these Marina disc brake kits are now going for around £466 on their website. So it's now costing more for a disc brake conversion for the front of your Morris Minor to fit yourself than it was to have it fitted at a workshop back in 1999, which just blows my mind, really. And a lot of these prices kind of really shocked me. I was prepared for kind of a bit of change in the prices, but really to see such a big jump for some of the things, especially some of the kind of metal-based steel work. Obviously the fuel tank's a good example of that, and the wings. It really did surprise me some way at how much that jump really was. Now, back in 1999, 2003, there was a lot of availability of lots of different places that you could buy your spares from. I was recently talking to some older Morris Minor owners who'd owned their Morris Minors for longer, and they were able to list off a pretty substantial list of places that you were able to get your Morris Minor spares from not that long ago. And gradually it seems that these have slowly started to decline, and it's worth thinking about what the impact of this might well be. When there's lots of people offering these sorts of spares and there's quite good availability, there's going to be a little bit more price competition. Prices are going to be kept down and at a reasonable profit, but not too high for the large majority of spares. And people can shop around. They can go, actually, I can get this bit for cheaper from so-and-so rather than from wherever it might be that's kind of charging a bit more. And so you shop around and you buy your parts from whoever you think's got the best quality bits, or whoever's kind of got the affordability attached to them. As we slowly, unfortunately, lose a few of these options, it's unfortunately going to be something we're going to have to perhaps worry about, where if we've only got one company offering and selling these parts, then that one company can set the prices of these spares, and that might then affect the affordability, the accessibility of these spares for people, and that's going to have a knock-on effect later on as well. Also, if you've only got one spares place available, what happens if something happens to that business? What happens to these cars that people have been able to keep going, keep using, keep enjoying, when we can't get spares from that one place? Obviously, clubs work really hard to have a decent collection of spares available to their members, and hopefully that's something that can be maintained. But that's not an easy feat either. Running of spares catalogues and things is a huge job, and it's not easy, and it's not often something that clubs can afford to pay somebody to do. So you're then stuck in this situation of, well, we want to be able to preserve these cars, and we want to be able to look after those who own our cars and continue to enjoy them. But it might not always be an option when people haven't got the space, time and inclination to keep supporting them. I was recently asked to kind of think about and provide a comment about the affordability of classic cars, and whether classic cars are still affordable to young people. And I think it's a lot more complex than you have time to discuss. I think that classic car in the initial purchase might still be an affordable option for young people, but for a lot of them it is going to be the option of it being their only car. It's going to be the only car that they can afford to run. So it then comes down to they need to be able to keep those cars going. And if we're starting to see issues with spare supplies and things like that, a classic car might not be a viable option for them to keep running and be their only car. And that's where we're going to see issues with young people continuing to enter the hobby. And it's one of many issues, and I'm not saying it's necessarily happened here today with what we're potentially seeing happen to one of the spare suppliers with Morris Minors. There's still a few others that provide parts, and we're lucky with Morris Minors that so many of these parts are cross-usable with other vehicles that were produced by BMC and British Leyland of the time. But it's certainly something that I think needs to be a bit more of a well thought out conversation. I think when we're talking about affordability of classic cars, we can't just think about that initial cost. We need to have much more complex and nuanced discussions about, okay, yes, that initial cost is achievable. We've had conversations before on the channel about the cost of insurance, and those conversations are still ongoing, and it's not fully resolved yet because people still have the same issues of getting insurance to an extent. So you've got the insurance cost, and then there's potentially an increasing issue with this spares availability, and it's I'm not here to put a bleak discussion on it, but it's certainly another thing that we need to be wary of. We need to, I think, as custodians of these cars and people who are hoping to keep them going for as long as possible, really think about how can we best help preserve these cars and preserve the availability of spares and the accessibility of spares for as long as possible. I hope you found this as interesting as I did, kind of looking up those prices. Hopefully it's made for some interesting thoughts for you, and perhaps something a little bit different to watch over this weird in-between period between Christmas and New Year. I hope you got whatever spares and parts you needed on your Christmas list for your classics, and that you go into the new year that's happening this weekend very happily motoring along. But in the meantime, drive safely and happy motoring.